Be prepared for a Clown Reaper stand as we enter Map 21, Bad Dream. I actually debated whether to even bother doing this one, but it needed keys and an Archvile jump to reach, so was it worth the effort? Well, it's a giant circular room completely swarming with cyber demons, and that's it. You need to get past the Spider Mastermind using them to cut through it, or possibly a BFG, teleport to the other side and make a mad dash for the 3 keys in the room. A Crusher ceiling drops down with an invulnerability sphere in the middle like some kind of pseudo-attempted cyber dreams, only with far less thought put into it. I get that it was meant to just be a silly secret level, but this makes the Fortress of Mystery look severely intricate and barely a click above the infamous Wowed Out Wad. Grab your half mask as we trod Map 3, the Catwalk. Yeah, not gonna lie, this level is honestly fairly weak, which is a shame after how much I enjoyed the first 2. Not only is the level aggressively linear, it just plain doesn't look all that good aesthetically. Now that doesn't mean it doesn't have some interesting ideas, like running down a board of computers and making a very trick jump. However, it does mean it's a sharp decline, which is kind of a shame. Just to get past the first area, you have to wait for sections of floor to move up and down, and you may as well cheat and jump if you've got the source port for it. It even has a point of no return to its exit, which I'm not a fan of at the best of times. The nicest thing that I can say about it is it's competent gameplay-wise, but it never really engaged me. It's time to head on down to South Park in Map 6, the Garrison. Honestly, the level seems like it's more about cheap-shotting than anything else, which I am definitely not a big fan of. It starts you out surrounded, which just seems tacky for levels meant to be pistol-started. There's a difference between being difficult and just being cheap. There are many much more difficult maps I enjoy quite a bit. Almost as if to compensate for this, there's a secret that's just absurdly generous with several BFGs and a Megasphere. The rest of the level is alright for the most part, at least the outer area. A lot of the underground areas are spacious, but they lack lighting, which I get why, but it makes it look pretty flat. Overall, the level isn't terrible, but I wish it had more effort on aesthetics and less just trying to cheap punch you. Get ready for self-contradictions in Map 8, Paradox. If there was an award for most ordinary level that you're most likely to forget about, Paradox would at least be a strong contender. While it does have my favorite 3 keys to the exit mechanic, it's barely there with 1 key mandatorily first and the latter 2 just which tower do you want to go into first. What sells me on the mechanic is if you have full reign over which to get first and each one requires some exploration, like the ones in Doom and Doom 2. The aesthetic is also just pretty bland, with green grass about the only relief from the onslaught of brown. It's sort of funny seeing Doom monsters and other objects being so colorfully contrasted, like they got lost and wound up in a PS3 era shooter. Time to abandon all hope and descend in Map 20, the express elevator to hell. It's centered around a big elevator that's constantly moving up and down, and that's the level's big gimmick. Now, if it was me, I'd use a combination of keys and switches, one on each level to get to the exit, and you can do it in any order. Sadly, this map ignores that kind of potential, making each area numbered and having to be done strictly in order. It's where you find the secret exit, and if you kill the 2 Archviles near the exit or you don't have all 3 keys, you've missed out on it because Archvile jumps. It's not the biggest loss if you miss it, you'll see why tomorrow, but still a shame it's missable. While re-entering different areas and different spots is cool, the level's overall too formulaic and linear for my liking. It's time to meet up with Barney for some drinks in Map 4, the Combine. After 2 fairly good levels and 1 lackluster level, this level's more of a half-hearted shrug, really. To the level's credit, it has some nice lighting, something I don't really discuss too often in levels. It has a nice exterior that contrasts pretty well with a more lit-up interior, and a couple of blinking lights help add to the immersion of a deteriorating base. There's also a pretty interesting sequence of lifting switches to get to a key, and I was surprised when I couldn't cheat it out either. Other than that, though, it's pretty standard as far as any Doom level goes. It does have a mandatory nukage pit, but there's a radiation suit, and if you have the required key, it only needs 1 trip. Overall, it's not a terrible level, but it isn't a great one either. It's just a Doom level for the doomed. It's time to dine on the shoulders of giants in Map 7, Titan Manor. Right off the bat, you've got a bombardment of enemies all around the moat in a dark environment, which feels a little bit cheap. As if that wasn't enough, there's a mandatory secret, and you can see my ranking of Doom 2 Spirit World to see how much I love those. Technically, it has 2 secret areas that are considered mandatory, but the latter has the courtesy of an arrow at least, unlike the fireplace one that only has burning. Now, one thing I will say to the level's credit is some of its visuals, like a barn area complete with water trough and a bedroom. Honestly, though, I'm kinda conflicted on this one. Unlike the spirit world, I do think the level has enough positive elements to redeem it of its sins. We must go up before we go down in map 19, Black Tower. The best thing I can say about this map is I love the concept, but only kinda like the execution. It's basically a tower that you fight your way up level by level until you reach the roof. Since the roof has a cyber demon among pillars, you might even say it's a pseudo kind of follow-up to the Tower of Babel. The level design isn't the prettiest, but having to return down with hordes of enemies isn't the worst concept ever. Making you fall into damaging lava and opening a long door to reach the exit though, yeah, I pretty strongly dislike that part. If nothing else, it has a good amount of content to it, lasting me a good 38 minutes to beat on my first go-around for these shorts. It's time to go bare knuckle with organs in map 5, the Fistula. I'm a little conflicted about this one, to be honest. On one hand, it has tighter design than the last two levels, and I got enjoyment out of it. On the other hand, it almost feels like the level ends way too quickly for my tastes. Yeah, it ends with an archvile, which is always good for a surprise guest, but other than that, there's really not that much resistance for the keys. You'd think getting the blue and then red keys would have enemies after you, but not really outside of the initial enemies that are already there. Since I looked around and took care of them beforehand, it felt like a mostly clear path to the exit, really. Now, like I said, it has some tight design, and I like the concept of lifts with multiple floors on them. I just wish the level had more to it, because it feels a bit too quick. Let's make some paper in map 10, Subterra. It seems the master levels have settled into a pattern of competent and even good, but not especially earth-shattering maps. Subterra has some interesting horns, I think, for the locked doors, but that's about it other than a large room with cages to make it stand out. I'm not the biggest fan of an imposed nukage pit to the exit, but I got to the exit with 195 health and 195 armor, so it's whatever. Funnily enough though, two doors actually use traditional strips to denote the door's lock. Well, I suppose one plus is that you certainly can't accuse the map of being too cramped. If anything, the aforementioned cages area might be a bit too big. Overall, it still has enough to it to keep me from getting bored, and at the same time, didn't really have anything to irritate me. It's a serviceable map for serving you, I suppose. 3 heads are better than 1 in map 17, Geryon. I'm beginning to think mandatory secrets are becoming a trend, although at least this one has a bit of it visible in the auto map to clue me in on it. The rest of the level is good, but not great, feeling a bit too in one direction for my personal taste. That doesn't mean it doesn't have branching paths and secrets, but it could really do with some wider areas instead of mostly narrow pathways. Well, you can't say it doesn't finish strong with a courtyard just packed to the gills with hell's finest. Just as the boiling hot cherry on top, you've got an archvile guarding the exit. Not super original, but it works. Overall, it's one of those levels that's more passable than anything else. Not the map you'd show off in your trophy collection, but not the map you're ashamed to admit you've played either. Let's get guided into pretty words in map 12, Virgil's Lead. For the level's positives, it's visually pleasing with a good amount of variety. The combat placements is also more than reasonable, if not the hardest. All around, these elements are exceptional. However, the level is bogged down by a couple of very cryptic spots, including yet another mandatory secret. Now, it technically has a visual difference in texture, but it's telling that an actual secret containing a megasphere uses the same scheme. Moreover, the press the interior switch to open the door is just all kinds of vague. I had to look that one up. I just don't see why this is necessary, especially in an action game like Doom. It's not like the master levels got you used to cryptic solutions either, unlike Romero, who took the time to establish shootable eyes for Sigil. It's time to get cracking and hacking in map 16, Nessus. Talk about a flash in hell's pan. Before I knew it, I had found the level's exit. Even deliberately looking around to make sure I killed every last demon and gotten the one real secret, it still took less time than any other map. Much like Fistula though, I think this is very much a matter of quality over quantity. After the previous map felt like it was just filler, it's nice to see a map that doesn't overstay its welcome. You just pop in, rid the area of its pest from hell problem, and head back home in time to watch my latest Let's Play of Resistance Retribution, which goes live around 3 hours after this YouTube short does. Shameless self-plugging aside, the map may be short-lived and not the most varied for colors, but it was still fun giving Hell's finest new holes while it lasted. We can ascend the Black Tower next time, but it's time to attend the evening services in map 18, Vesperas. I find it ironic that after complaining about mandatory secrets, there's a key I wouldn't quite say that about, but the level does because it's marked as a secret. I actually had a harder time finding the red key, though I'll admit that's kind of on me for not noticing the switch down a lift. Hard to find keys aside, the rest of the level is pretty competently designed. It seems the good Dr. Sleep likes making brown bases sometimes with a touch of hell, and his levels have been overall solid, with my favorite level so far being one of his. The Cyber Demon fight was actually really easy because of the invulnerability sphere in the room, but at least it was pretty fun melting him. Prepare for a lot of red as we enter map 14, Bloodsea Keep. You know, maybe it's just me, but I don't see the need to put mandatory things behind hidden walls, especially in a damaging space you'd naturally want to avoid. The map's fine apart from that, with a decent amount to do and some optional secrets. The imposing black throne that spawns an archvile when you get near it was a nice and unexpected touch. The level makes good use of the marble texture, with plenty of greens and grays to serve as a contrast against the titular sea of red. It's kind of funny to see a barrier just all around the Blood Sea, but I guess it's just a hand wave you not being able to go for a lengthy swim in the stuff. It also has some interesting variety, like 4 crushes in front of switches with some wrinkles along the way. Get ready to go down below into containment in Map 9, Subspace. You know, I'd like to think there is a difference between carefully crafted maps and maps where the guy just threw a bunch of sectors and monsters together and called it a day. Thankfully, Subspace is more towards the former, best seen from the start with doors you have to melee open, alerting lost souls just behind the windows. The map isn't exactly a heavy hitter where enemies are concerned, but it does have an interesting pseudo-puzzle with a 4-sided cube of switches. It isn't exactly hard to figure out, you just have to look around, but it did throw me for a loop for a second, which I can respect. I'm also guessing the rocket launcher at the exit is proof these maps were meant to be connected. Well, either that or Kristen Klee is a Bond villain toying players with something they're just going to lose anyway. Let's christen the master levels of Doom 2 with Map 1 Attack. While the maps didn't originally have an order, the PS3 release did, so I'm going with that. Attack is fitting as the first because it has some visual elements of entryway, especially near the beginning. As you probably expect, it doesn't shy away from some heavier hitters, though at least they're in mercifully low numbers. Only 1 Revenant, 1 Mancubus, and no Archvile? Frankly, it's much more merciful than Platonia's first level. Going through Quake has also made me really appreciate Doom's levels for having multiple paths and even optional areas. It's very straightforward in terms of get key, open door, repeat, but it's nice to explore and has a nice tech base with water canals aesthetic. It's not one of the best Doom levels ever made or anything, but so far so good. It's a very solid and pretty enjoyable starter level. I'd place it at least up there with Doom 2's entryway. It's time to take a mule ride in Map 2 Canyon. So far, the master levels are 2 for 2 with pretty well put together levels. The enemy placement is relatively tame here too, although a Revenant strategically placed did give me slightly more trouble. The level design itself is pretty nicely spaced out and seems to always have at least 2 ways in and out for each area. It has a mix of slime, bricks, and tech base, and it never feels repetitive, with each area being very recognizable. The only criticism I would give from a level design perspective is a couple of areas that prioritize size a bit more over tightness. That's of course more of a nitpick than anything else, but it's something I'd say Attack overall does better. However, Canyon has the edge in how engaging I found the combat and overall the flow of the level. It's time to capture giants in Map 11, Trapped on Titan. I have to give this level props, it's definitely one of the most exploration-friendly Doom levels I've seen. The area with the blue skull key and subsequent ledges for its door aren't required, but they're very welcomed additions. It has a fair amount of enemies throughout, but nothing you can't handle by now. Naturally, the cherry on top is a cyber demon that you can actually trick into being put into a position to be telefragged if you're clever enough. Or maybe that's just because his blood looks cherry flavored. It really knows how to unfold itself in ways you couldn't have predicted. Lifts leading into a big city that's only part of the level, and I actually love that. My first try for this ranking had me beating the level in just over half an hour, which says it all for its content. It's time to face the giant urn in Map 13, Minos Judgment. It's amazing. This is genuinely a good and enjoyable level that doesn't really have strings attached. While it's not perfect by any means, it manages to both have good visual design with strong use of lighting and engaging combat that's tough but not annoying. Other than the usual tricks and traps of Doom fare, everything is as you would expect, but the execution is better than I would have thought. Faking you out with an archvile being trapped into a cage and then teleporting behind you genuinely caught me off guard in a good way and kept me on my toes.
Surprise, mother...
The environments have a rich amount of detail and a good mix of smaller and larger areas that bring out the larger without the smaller feeling too cramped. It's time to master this ranking list of the master levels of Doom 2. This pack might have the wildest range of good to bad, not just because it has easily the worst secret level and just worst level in general of all time in it. At its best, it wouldn't look out of place in Doom 1 just with Doom 2 stuff in it. Minos' Judgment really shows that when you have a good level design without a lot of gimmicks, the results are vastly more pleasing. I don't expect everyone to agree with this list. Maybe someone out there thought that Garrison was great and I was just being salty. Taken as a whole, I would at least recommend it to people who want more like Doom 2 or Final Doom, and you can do a lot worse for Doom levels out there. Id Software approved of this to combat shovelware maps, and with one obvious exception, I'd say they all have at least redeemable qualities. We can blast aliens through space and time with Duke Nukem 0 Hour later on, but